Hello, and welcome back to another Chris McPherson Show Daily Dose. It's time to talk some rugby league with Peter V'landys coming out in the last 24 hours and announcing not only a State of Origin game going to New Zealand and confirming when that will happen, but more notably talking about a change to rugby league State of Origin eligibility rules. To pick it all apart, I'm going to be joined by Tony Delaney in a moment. But of course, if you love your rugby league, you love your other sport, make sure to hit subscribe, hit like on the video, get involved in the comments and let us know what your takeaways are from this and in general in regards to this topic and anything else rugby league. And of course, we'll pick apart some of the NRL trials as well at the end of the show. But as I said, joined by Tony Delaney. TD, good to have you with us again.
Yeah, great to be back, Chris. Obviously, mate, massive ratings last week. Maths in trouble, mate, with us on the air together.
Very, very big trouble when you get both of us, especially, not audio only. That's generally people's preference with our heads. But anyway.
Exactly.
Speaking of massive trouble, the NRL through Peter V'landys, and I think absolutely no coincidence that he did this within 24 hours of the AFL relaunching their State of Origin with their game over in WA. But they've announced new eligibility rules for State of Origin, which means that players can now choose to play for their nation of choice that they meet eligibility criteria for, but also play Origin, i.e. won't compromise their Origin status if they choose to play for the likes of England or New Zealand, so long as they are already meeting that criteria for New South Wales or Queensland, which is that they were born in that state or they played their rugby league in that state prior to the age of 13, or finally that their father played, and I assume that will get to a point at some point too with mothers, played State of Origin for that state. What are the key takeaways? What's the key thoughts initially when you saw this?
Yeah, obviously, Chris, I mean, it's always been the case previously where Tier 1 nations obviously have been disqualified, England, New Zealand, that sort of thing as well. We're probably going to, this particular announcement now probably paves the way, for example, someone like a Victor Radley, who's made that decision to go and play for England, potentially to, don the sky blue of New South Wales. Being a traditionalist, mate, obviously, we talk about State of Origin where previously, before State of Origin, we had a residency where we saw a lot of Queensland's finest talent, donning the sky blue of New South Wales and giving Queensland an absolute bath in interstate fixtures for, 50, 60 years. And obviously the birth of the Origin concept, started to turn the tables. Of course, we never forget those magnificent images of the great Arthur Beetson running on the Lang Park with the, all the powder in front of his jersey and all the rest of it, of course. But, now, the main concern, the main takeaways is that do we find ourselves in somewhat of an all-stars concept, or does the Origin parameters that have been set previously in regards to history, tradition, toughness, that sort of thing, is that going to instill that same type of football that we see at Origin football as well? We still don't get to the point there, though. I mean, you can imagine, had they made it different, could you imagine, say, a Sam Burgess and James Graham propping up the back row for New South Wales? Yeah, look, probably not going to get to that point.
I think we're not going to get to that point, but just like you alluded to just before, with State of Origin, when it came about, there was a reason that it came about, and that was because the system that was operating, which was a residency-based one, wasn't working. And the reality is 1979 Australia, which is when that got bandied about and started in 1980, is a very different looking mix to what 2026 Australia is, right? When we have a look at a lot of these Pacific Islander families, other countries as well. And as you said, there'll be some players that will be directly impacted by this, but I think we're in a very different society. There's a lot more of these players. I don't know what the numbers are, but I'd suggest it was in the very low single-digit percentages of Pacific Islander players, even players of, New Zealand heritage in 1980. Yes, we had a few more English at that point, but Sam Burgess would never be eligible under the current rules. If they dilute them further, well, I'm happy to eat my words at that point. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of players who, identify or have family heritage and play for these other countries. And whether it's Tier 1 or Tier 2, we're already starting to see pushback around some of the Tier 2 fringe nations, the Samoas, the Tongas, those sorts of things. It removes any of that ambiguity, and it also protects the legacy and future of Test football, because let's be honest, Test football finally is starting to become genuinely competitive across more than 2 or 3 nations. This allows for that to continue on if those countries pick up in competition, because otherwise you've got countries sitting there going, we don't want to become a Tier 1 Test nation and become competitive, because then all of a sudden our Brian To'os, our Jason Taumalolos, these sorts of players are no longer eligible to play for Samoa or Tonga. So I think realistically it's only affecting a handful of players. You named Victor Radley before, maybe Kalen Ponga, Adam Fanua-Blake. Look, I'll tell you what, it's a bloody scary New South Wales front row when you potentially got Adam Fanua-Blake and Payne Haas carting it up front. But those sorts of players, the Herbie Farnworth as well, there's a handful of these sorts of players that might impact eligibility. I don't think we're going to get fully to an all-star game. If you were born, grew up in England, Ireland, Scotland, New Zealand, anywhere else, Sean Johnson under the current rules, who is still playing, doesn't get to play for state of origin. But yes, Kalen Ponga could still play for Queensland and make himself eligible for his New Zealand heritage as well. So I think there's a bit there where they're trying to lean into people's heritage. There's also a bit where I think Peter V'landys is trying to hedge the bet of not being an either or between, what succeeds in the next 15 years, state of origin or test football.
Yeah, well, Chris, I think that these state of origin announcements almost, if you have a look at how it affects the whole of game outcome, the state of origins to one side. Realistically, if you look at our product out of the rugby codes, I think we have the best domestic competition massively compared to Super Rugby. I think our representative season domestically, the state of origin dwarfs anything that the Rugby Union Code does. However, where we really lack behind in the third and the side game has been international football. Now, for a long period of time there, particularly in the early days, particularly you look at some of the great French sides of the 60s, it was a powerhouse thing in the National Rugby League. But now the Rugby Union World Cup dwarfs that of what we have in Rugby League, and it's very much a shadow of itself. But, if we get the likes of these Pacific Island nations and we start to, rebuild the English side, and that may happen with the purchase of the Super League potentially as we continue to grow the game globally. And also for the NRL with this international revenue they're bringing through this Watch NRL app, which has been a massive thing, obviously, particularly in the likes of Vegas as we head into the season opener. That's probably one of the key takeaways is that, we're thinking about origin here, but I think Mr. V'landys, and this is how he looks at things, is looking at that international type of football and how we can be a powerhouse code in that regard, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to, as you allude to there, it comes down to not just, maybe Great Britain or maybe New Zealand every third or fourth year being able to compete with Australia. And I know a lot of people say it's going to undermine the strength of the Australian side, but what it does is it actually levels the playing field a little bit in international football. And we're still going to have the lion's share as Australia from that point of view. The one question I always have whenever any of these changes is made is what is the unintended consequence? And there's always an unintended consequence. The only one I can spot at the moment, and I might have some blind spots on this, is a push of Pacific Island and Kiwi and even British families where they've got kids who are playing rugby league as their sport of choice at the age of 12 wanting to up and out to Australia to go and play, state of origin. That said, they'll still be able to play for their nations under this rule. And realistically, as you and I both know, having been involved around junior rugby league in a number of different places, the best kids at 12 aren't often the ones who end up making the NRL anyway.
No, definitely not. And look, probably the other question, you're completely right there about that, Chris. So it does have that attraction. But the other thing is that can you name something in the last, since he's taken control there of the RLC commissioner, Mr. V'landys, is there anything that he hasn't done that hasn't had a revenue base at the back end of it? And I think that, again, we look at that Watch NRL app and the extra, money that's going to bring in the likes of Vegas and then the purchase of the Super League. It's going to obviously increase the revenue bring. If you look at the National Rugby League Federation, it's actually one of the poorest governing bodies in the world when it comes to sport. You know what I mean? Like they're almost like a volunteer body to somewhat powerless in regards to the governance of the game. And to do that, I think that he's looking at a whole of game objective here, both financially, but also in regards to the marketability, but also in regards to the structure of the game and how that's going to work there. So I think this has a flow and a lot of consequences. But getting back to the main question, is it a good thing for rugby league? Chris, the history, the traditionalist in myself probably says no. But, I think that we can't continue to look through, the rose-coloured glasses of the 80s and 90s and the hype of origin. And we probably need to, move with the time, so to speak. And look, there would have been a time there where, we probably thought that this state of origin concept, most people said when it came in, that's not going to work. They've been proven wrong many years later, haven't they?
They certainly have. And I think, as you say, a lot of this is based around revenue. It's based around the global growth of the game. We've heard the rumours and whispers coming out of Michael Chammas. I'm not sure whether he's a journalist or a club executive anymore or a bit of both as he makes his transition to the Chiefs. But, around NRL global round kicking off the season, there's been talk of Hong Kong, the Middle East, Japan, lots of different places. And obviously they're following that NFL model. And I'm going to be honest, if you're a sporting administrator and you're going to try and shadow another competition, the NFL is probably a pretty bloody good one that's, to mimic and posturize yourself after.
It certainly is, Chris. Look, at the end of the day, these, so-called investors that are interested in this R360 model, people don't invest in something out without ROI, do they? Now, if the NRL go ahead with this global round, to some extent it mimics, if you are playing a game in Monte Carlo, if you are playing a game in LA, if you are playing a game in London, Sydney, whatever it may be, it's going to mimic that model. And I think that the other thing that we need to understand now, both in the UK, look, at the moment in the UK, I'll put it to you that the best rugby athletes are playing in domestic international competitions in England rugby. They're not necessarily playing Super League. Hence why we see the amount of imports that we do. And we see results in English League where, look, I love the idea of the Challenge Cup. The romance of it is fantastic. And we saw that even here, many months ago, last season, in regards to seeing, for example, Cooksey United play the Newcastle Jets in front of a significant crowd there at the number 2 sports ground. Hull versus Loch Lane with a 104-0 result. Probably not the greatest advertisement for the game in the English competition as well. So this is another way for us to compete for those athletes. There's not a whole lot of differences between the sport, the 15-man aside code and the 13-man aside code as well. So there are so many flow-on effects to this one, Chris. But, as long as we keep what makes State of Origin Rugby League so special, is the tribalism. It's those experiences. It's walking down Caxton Street on the way to Suncorp on a Wednesday night. It's the cold drizzle of Sydney, whether it be at the SCG, whether it be at Allianz, whether it be, now at its new home at Accor Stadium, as they walk through the blue tunnel there from the Centre of Excellence. We need to keep those history and traditions of the game as long as those are respected, as long as when you think about Queensland, you think about the great man like the King, Wally Lewis. When you think about the performances of New South Wales, we think Johns, Fittler, those guys as well. The history and traditions are protected. We'll continue to. Origin football has changed. You can't just punch people out anymore, unfortunately. Thanks, Paul Gallen. But as long as we continue that rivalry and that hatred, Origin football will remain the pinnacle of the rugby league game for years to come.
Yeah, I agree. I think that passion word that underlies it all is the key. And I think we've done what we can in terms of what PVL's announced here to try and maintain that whilst also modernising for what is, as I said, modern society. And that's, I think, a really key factor that we need to understand is the multicultural nature of our Australian society. As always, TD, a big thank you to you. I'm going to let you go and park up and rest up, and I'm going to pick apart some trials. But great to have you on the show as always.
No worries, mate. Look forward to it.
We'll now move on to the NRL trials, and there were certainly plenty of games across the weekend. We're not going to dig into the weeds on all of them, just talking some headline acts and some moments and pieces that sides have got to work on. And we might start with that Cowboys absolute demolition against Penrith, 66-24, a first half demolition. They were really strong, really solid. Reid Marnie was a key underlining pillar. Once they started to make some changes in the second half for the Cowboys, there was certainly, I guess, some more gaps coming. But for Penrith, a very young side, I don't take too much from it. But again, Reid Marnie, the former Bulldogs captain, an immediate statement in Cowboys colours, a 44-0 first half against the Panthers. And he just looked elite out of dummy half. I think he's going to add another level there. He's a different player to Reece Robson and will certainly look to add some more to this Cowboys team. And I think they might actually be, despite a lot of people writing them off, watch for Todd Payten to get this side back in and around the 8 and be right there if they can stay healthy. It's going to be interesting to see how they perform. In other results, the Canberra Raiders had a big win over the Storm. And I think the talking point here was Dane Laurie. Slotting into the halves, he was instrumental in their win over the Storm. Expect that he'll probably end up filling a bench utility role, but Ricky Stewart's going to have some really interesting question marks here. He's brought in a number of key players. We've obviously got the likes of Black and Sanders battling for the 7 jersey to play alongside Ethan Strange. You've then got Laurie who can come in at 14, but then they've also got a stack of dummy half options too with Owen Paddy, Tom Starling and Brayley there as well. So certainly some good headaches for Ricky Stewart as the Raiders look to improve on finishing not just with a minor premiership, but with their finals run this year, now that Jamal Fogarty has departed and gone to the Manly Sea Eagles. Also on the weekend, we had the Dragons and the Rabbitohs playing in the Charity Shield game. Weird not to see this in Mudgee. That was a bit of a curly one, but with the Dragons travel, that wasn't going to happen with them heading to Vegas. And it was a fairly youthful South Sydney side that got home 28-24 in this one. Quite a solid performance all in all from the Rabbitohs. And look, Cade Reid, again, continuing to be a name that's going to be thrown about for the Dragons, as is King Togo as well. So interesting times for the Dragons. Some question marks around what their halves look like coming into the season. I guess we'll know more as they head to Vegas. We've got the Tigers and the Roosters, and the one that impressed me here was Hamasai Makasini for the Tigers, looking like he should be a selection for wing or centre for the Tigers in round 1, getting a hat-trick in that 42-26 win over the Sydney Roosters. So certainly really positive to see that. Tigers fans will love seeing another young star emerge Obviously, quite a bit being talked about at the moment with Jareem Buller and his future as the club, and he can't quite agree on that mutual option and who's going to trigger it, if they're going to trigger it. I believe there's about $100,000 in difference between the two parties triggering it. So we'll wait and see. Certainly really interesting from that point of view. The Knights and the Dogs. Now, this one, I probably want to get in the weeds a little bit more on. Dylan Brown, his first outing in Knights colours, really putting it to show there. Looks solid without breaking the house down. He did talk about it post-game and said, look, I was just working out there trying to get my defence and my kicking in order. I wasn't trying to overplay my hand. But a 28-0 shutout for the Dogs draws some real concerns for me if you're a Knights fan. They were pinned in their own half in that second half. They barely saw it outside of their own 30-metre line. Repeated 6 agains given away, poor completion, and their forwards just not getting the go forward. And so that's a real concern. I know Trey Mooney was playing in the All Stars game, but again, really concerning for me that, we saw this situation all play out and they just didn't really have any resilience. And then you throw in no resilience to no discipline and no completion. All of a sudden, that's a really tough place to be. And, you have a look at the likes of, this great-looking spine the Knights have got on paper with Ponga, Brown. Looks like Sandon Smith at 7. If you listen to Dylan Brown's post-game comments, he talked about he was expecting Sandon to be the man alongside him there. These guys, it doesn't matter how good they're going to play if they're on the back foot constantly behind a pack that's not going forward. And it's a young pack. It's a depleted pack. And, it feels like the Knights are just hoping that a couple of these young guys take that magical leap that we've seen. The Raiders pack took over the last couple of years. Some of the young guys at the Bulldogs, like a Preston and these sorts of guys have taken as well. But there just doesn't seem to be the go for. They're undersized when you're playing with people like Tyson Frizzell as middles as well. And, look, they've got great players in the pipeline, but it's going to be hard for how long that pipeline can stay afloat before players start saying, geez, I don't want to hang around at this club because we're not performing. They take opportunities elsewhere. Or alternatively, before their spine starts getting knocked about, injured from carrying too much load, or their outside backs again. They've got plenty of punch out wide. They've got lots of opportunity, but it's about getting all these players firing and performing for them. So, it's a tough one for Knights fans at the moment. Again, hopefully trial form means nothing and they get their proverbial shit together and go well in Vegas, but I guess we'll wait and see. That was sort of the main pieces we wanted to unpick here. The other one, Tom Flegler's his return for the Dolphins. Wonderful to see. Got across the stripe. Wasn't the result that they wanted. The Titans did get it done. So that was positive to see. In terms of, I guess major injury concerns from the round, Matt Burton's probably the biggest name of those. A hamstring injury in that win over Newcastle. He's going to be racing the clock to be fit for the Vegas flight on February 19 and obviously the game thereafter. So we will keep our eyes open on that one. It's certainly going to be interesting. Hame Sele, he got a Category 1 concussion about 90 seconds into that charity. She was very early. So he's got to get through those 11-day protocols to be able to play in round 1 in Vegas. And Jonah Glover, the young promising half for the Rabbitohs in their win over the Dragons. He looks like he suffered a broken jaw. So that's going to be quite a gap of absence for him. So, really, really tough times. But we'll wait and see what comes of that. But, really looking forward to round 3 of the trials this weekend. It's really exciting, but then you'll have the 4 sides sitting out from that because they'll be getting ready for Vegas and flying over. So, certainly interesting times. And, of course, it'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the NRL All Stars game because it finished 16-all and the draw locked in, no golden point. Fans really unhappy about this one being played in Hamilton, Waikato. It was really disappointing. Even the players a little confused. So, it needs to be golden point. With the match 16-all, I think most of the players and the fans assume that golden point. But because it's an exhibition event and players aren't wanting to be risked by their clubs and their coaches. So, certainly a little bit of disappointing anticlimactic finish over there in Waikato. But the Maori All Stars retained the trophy because they won 10-6 last year. The Indigenous side almost got away with it, but denied a match-winning try by the bunker. So very, very confusing all in all. But there we go. That is the NRL All Stars. There's never controversy too far separated from rugby league, that is for certain. But look, a big thanks to Tony Delaney for coming on, picking apart the origin changes. A big thank you to you for tuning in. Make sure if you haven't already, hit subscribe, hit like on the video, hit the bell down below as well. That'll give you notifications each and every time we drop a video. But until next time, head on over to our social media channels for much more content at The Chris Mack Show. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. But until next time, thanks for tuning into your home of the black and white of sports. No great opinions here. We'll see you again soon.